What if asking for a simple glass of water could unravel an entire system? On a quiet red-eye flight to Los Angeles, one woman presses the call button and sets off a chain of events no one saw coming. How far does quiet injustice go before someone finally speaks up? Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. It was nearly midnight in Atlanta, and the airport lights cast a pale, sleepless glow over everything. The terminal smelled like recycled air and fast food. People shuffled forward in silence, dragging their bags and exhaustion behind them. Gate E14 blinked on the overhead screen, announcing the final boarding call for Skybridge Air Flight SB 394 to Los Angeles. Doretta Vance moved without rush. There was no need. She knew exactly when to step in line and exactly how long it would take to reach her seat. Her cardigan hung loose over a cream-colored blouse, and her bag was small, tidy, no nonsense, just like her. She walked like someone used to watching more than speaking. People rarely noticed her, and that was exactly how she liked it. She took her seat, 14C aisle. The cushion was stiff, the tray scratched, the air faintly metallic. Across the aisle, a man in his 20s scrolled through something on his phone. Behind her, a couple argued quietly about seat assignments. But she tuned it all out. Instead, she looked around. Not with judgment, with intention. She noted the way the flight attendants moved, who they looked at, who they smiled at, and who they brushed past. Small things. Details. She was trained to see what others didn't. Doretta Vance wasn't just a quiet passenger. She was a field evaluator for the American Society of Aviation Standards, ASIS. Her job was to board flights anonymously and assess how passengers were treated. Not in theory, in practice. In the little things. Like asking for water. The lights dimmed as the cabin crew prepared for takeoff. A flight attendant walked past her, Melinda Grove, name tag pinned to her pressed Navy uniform. Blonde, mid-40s, sharp jaw, tired eyes. Doretta waited. 37 minutes into the flight, after snack service had concluded and most passengers were settling in, she pressed the small call button above her head. It was a simple test. Melinda approached, expression unreadable. Yes. I was wondering if I could have a small glass of water, Doretta said gently. Just water. Melinda didn't blink. We're not serving anything right now. That time has passed. Doretta offered a soft smile. If it's not too much trouble, I'd really appreciate it. Melinda cut her off with a flat look and the smallest shake of her head. Not at this time, she said, turning without another word. Doretta didn't move for a few seconds. Her fingers remained resting on her lap, calm, but her eyes followed Melinda's back as she walked away. A few rows ahead, Melinda leaned over and whispered something to another attendant, both of them glancing her way. Doretta reached into her bag and took out a soft leather notebook. She clicked her pen once, almost inaudibly, and jotted down a line in practice script. She was being recorded, too, but not by someone else. Tucked beneath the third button of her blouse was a discreet micro camera, a pinhole lens, government grade, silently documenting the interaction in 1080p. 2 rows ahead, Warren Pike, a graying man in a weathered brown sport coat, had seen everything. He adjusted his seatbelt, glanced back at Doretta, then down at the book resting on his lap. He didn't say a word, but he'd noticed. Doretta could feel it, the silence around her, thick and uncomfortable. The kind that came when people saw something wrong, but weren't sure what to do about it. She wasn't angry. Not visibly. Her shoulders remained steady, her breath even. But her eyes, those told a different story. Tired, but resolute. This wasn't the first time. And deep down, she doubted it would be the last. Overhead, the captain's voice broke through the speakers, announcing light turbulence ahead and asking passengers to remain seated. The lights dimmed even further as the cabin shifted into sleep mode. Doretta leaned back slightly, her hands resting over her notebook. Her gaze settled on the cup of ice water, sitting on the tray in front of a man 2 rows ahead. A white man who'd requested his drink just minutes before she did. He was now snoring lightly, unaware of any imbalance. She took a deep breath, flipped open her notebook again, and scribbled a line in neat cursive. Bias in basic service access, confirmed. Continue observation for patterns. Then she closed the notebook with care, rested it beside her, and looked forward into the darkness of the cabin, waiting. Waiting, not just for the rest of the flight, but for what would happen next. The cabin had gone quiet, the kind of hush that only comes at 35,000 feet, past midnight. Most of the overhead lights were off, just a faint blue wash glowing from the aisle, casting long shadows over slumped bodies and half-dreaming faces. Somewhere behind her, someone snored softly. The engines hummed steady like a lullaby nobody asked for. Doretta sat upright in her seat, hands folded neatly over her lap. She hadn't moved much since takeoff. Not because she was stiff or tired, but because she was watching, listening. Everything mattered. The angle of a smile, the pause before a response, who got a second cookie, and who didn't. Her pen moved gently over her notebook, almost like she was writing a letter rather than a report. No big statements, no dramatic language. Just notes. Short, precise. Enough to build a picture, not a case. A row ahead, in seat 12B, a man shifted in his seat. Warren Pike. Mid-60s, maybe a bit older, wearing a pressed blue shirt tucked into belted khakis. His back was straight, military, almost. The kind of posture that stayed with you even after retirement. He wasn't reading. Wasn't sleeping either. He was watching, just like her. Earlier, when the attendant had turned her down for a glass of water, Warren had seen it all. The flat refusal. The clipped tone. The complete dismissal. He hadn't looked away, but he hadn't stepped in either. And when moments later, he saw that same attendant smile warmly and pour hot tea for a younger white man across the aisle, something in his chest tightened. But he stayed silent. Now he watched her again, eyes resting on Doretta's stillness. He didn't know who she was, not really. But something about the way she held herself, the calm, the composure, reminded him of the officers he used to fly with. The ones who knew things might go wrong and kept flying anyway. Across the aisle, a soft ding broke the quiet. A young black mother pressed the call button, rocking a fussy toddler in her arms. The little one had been crying on and off for nearly an hour, his wails cutting through the hush like a small siren. The mother looked exhausted, her hair slightly undone, her voice soft as she whispered to him. Melinda, the same attendant from earlier, approached. She wore that same controlled smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ma'am, other passengers are trying to sleep," she said, tone tight, clipped. "I know," the woman replied, voice nearly breaking. "I was just hoping for a warm towel or something to help soothe them." Melinda didn't nod, didn't even pause. "There's nothing I can do right now," she said, already turning away. A few rows back, a group of white passengers laughed too loud at something on their phones. Melinda strolled past them a few minutes later, laughing along, offering extra snacks. Warren looked down at his hands, clenched them, unclenched, then glanced toward Doretta again. She wasn't writing. Not yet. She was still. But her eyes were wide open. Inside her, something had shifted. 20 years ago, she'd sat on a different flight, wearing second-hand jeans and a college hoodie, accidentally walking into first class. A flight attendant had stopped her, loudly, like she was trying to sneak into someplace sacred. Everyone looked. No one spoke. That silence stuck with her longer than the humiliation. And tonight it was happening again, not to her, not only to her. But she was the one here to witness it. She pulled out her tablet slowly, tapping into a secure reporting system. A digital signal pinged back from Oz's headquarters. 2 incidents logged. 1 denial of basic service. 1 instance of biased tone and language. Logged under Flight SB 394, timestamped, geotagged, verified. Within seconds, a response lit up the screen. Bias indicators confirmed. Continue silent observation. If threat or escalation occurs, you are authorized to unseal identity. Doretta read the message twice. Then she closed the app and slid the tablet into her seat back pocket. It wasn't just her anymore. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. Not all of it, but enough. She glanced toward the mother and child, now curled tighter together. then toward Warren, who was still watching her, eyebrows drawn like he was working something out. He didn't speak, but he gave a small nod, barely there. Doretta nodded back. It was close to 3 a.m., though you wouldn't have known it unless you looked at a watch. The plane floated quietly in the dark sky, wrapped in silence that felt just a little too tight, a little too aware. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that hummed underneath your skin like something waiting to snap. Doretta hadn't moved much. Her legs were starting to stiffen, but her mind was restless. She glanced sideways and caught Melinda walking slowly through the aisle again, checking seatbelts. Her movements were automatic, routine, but her eyes skipped past Doretta as if she wasn't there. Deliberate. When Melinda finally stopped near her row, Doretta raised her eyes and spoke, her voice quiet but even. "Excuse me," she said. "Have I done something to upset you?" The question hung there for a second longer than it should have. Melinda's body stiffened, not dramatically, but noticeably. She didn't answer, just gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind that didn't belong to any real emotion, and walked off without another word. Doretta didn't follow her with her eyes. She just let the silence settle again, heavier than before. Behind the curtain near the galley, Melinda leaned in close to another attendant and whispered, "Something's off about that woman in 14C. She's been writing stuff down since we boarded. I'm noting her as a possible disturbance." The attendant blinked, unsure. "She hasn't done anything, though." Melinda didn't wait for agreement. Better safe than sorry. A few minutes later, a junior attendant, young guy, probably new, walked by and dropped off a quiet note at the crew station. Warren Pike, seated nearby, didn't catch every word exchanged, but he heard just enough. "Passenger flagged for potential noncompliance," someone mumbled. 14C. Yeah. Melinda's request. Warren's back stiffened. He'd been chewing on his silence for the last hour, and now it had turned sour in his mouth. The thought that someone like Doretta, so calm and composed, could be labeled a problem just for asking a question, that didn't sit right with him. Still, he didn't move. Not yet. Meanwhile, Doretta sat still, though inside, she was unraveling. This wasn't new. She'd seen these dynamics before, in hotel lobbies, at corporate check-ins, even in elevators where someone clutched their purse a little tighter. But the difference here was stakes. She wasn't just another passenger anymore. She was being marked, and that could follow her past this flight, past this night. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the low vibration of the engines beneath her feet. Her breath came steady, but the question in her chest wouldn't go away. Do I let this play out, or do I end here? The rules were clear. OSIS had strict procedures for anonymous audits. Intervening before a full incident could void the report. But what if this wasn't just a case? What if this became a scene? She reached for her tablet again, her fingers slower this time. She tapped through the encrypted interface and reviewed the footage. The denial of service, the dismissive tone, the contrast in behavior toward other passengers. All there. She tapped a button to begin syncing the data to OSIS's secure central system. The video uploaded quietly, without fanfare. She whispered to herself, just in case. That's when she caught Warren's eyes again. He was staring straight ahead, but his fingers tapped nervously against his tray table. Something was on his mind, too. He glanced at her, then quickly looked away, like someone deciding if it was time to speak or time to run. Doretta didn't expect anything from him. She never did from bystanders. But she'd be lying if she said it didn't sting a little, to be seen and still left alone. She looked out the window into the darkness. No stars. Just the black curve of the world far below. Her reflection stared back at her faintly, tired but awake. And the question came again, quieter this time, but heavier. Will the truth be enough this time? She didn't have an answer yet. But she knew the plane was descending, and the ground was coming fast. Doretta felt the soft vibration of her tablet against her leg. Just 3 pulses, barely noticeable to anyone else. She slipped it out of the seat pocket with practiced ease, tilting the screen to avoid the glow catching the eye of any curious passenger nearby. A message had come through. Video geo-confirmed. Full transmission received. If detained or your rights are compromised, you are authorized to reveal credentials. She didn't move at first. Her eyes just scanned the message again, as if repetition might change its weight. It didn't. Her hand remained on the screen longer than necessary, not from hesitation, but from understanding. This was no longer quiet work. This was the moment everything turned. The plane hummed along, a soft mechanical whisper filling the cabin. Most of the passengers were sleeping or pretending to, curled into coats, heads slumped on tray tables, earbuds in. The lights had dimmed again, casting a cold, blue glow across the aisle, like moonlight underwater. But Doretta wasn't underwater. She was wide awake. She leaned her head back, her neck stiff from stillness, and stared up at the dark curve of the ceiling. And for the first time all night, she stopped analyzing. Stopped watching. She remembered. She remembered being 19. Remembered standing in the wrong aisle of a different plane, confused and tired and desperate to make it home in time for her mother's surgery. She remembered how a flight attendant's voice, sharp, too loud, cut through the cabin. "Miss, are you sure you're supposed to be here?" No kindness. No clarification. Just doubt. Suspicion in a uniform. Everyone had looked. No one had helped. She'd backed away, cheeks on fire, throat tight with humiliation. The memory of that walk back to coach had stayed with her like something stained into her skin. She hadn't said a word then, but the silence that had once protected her now felt like betrayal. Not just hers, but everyone's. Across the aisle, Warren Pike tapped his pen softly against the paper in front of him. His eyes kept drifting toward her, brows pulled in, like he wanted to speak but didn't know how. After a long pause, he bent forward and began to write something, carefully, quickly, as if he were finally putting down something he'd been holding for too long. Doretta didn't watch, but she felt it. She stood, slow and composed, making her way down the narrow aisle toward the lavatory. She didn't rush, didn't look back. When she returned, something had been tucked into the seat pocket in front of her. A folded note. She opened it without fanfare, reading the handwriting in the dim glow. "You're not crazy. I saw it too. I didn't say anything, but I will if needed. You're not alone." She didn't smile. Not quite. But something shifted in her chest. The tension loosened, not gone, but lighter. Carried, now, by more than one person. 2 rows back, a child's voice broke the hush. "Why didn't you get any water?" a little girl asked her mother, whispering too loudly for the quiet cabin. She asked nice. Her mother shifted in her seat, eyes darting toward Doretta and quickly away again. "Sometimes people just forget, honey," she murmured. But the tremble in her voice said she didn't quite believe that. Doretta turned, met the child's eyes briefly. The girl waved, just a little movement, almost unsure. Doretta gave her a slight nod. Nothing theatrical, just real. Up near the galley, Melinda adjusted her earpiece, her voice low as she leaned into the intercom channel. "Captain, I'd like to flag passenger 14C. She's been behaving oddly, writing things down, watching me." There was a pause. "I think she might be a problem. Just a heads up, we may need security on arrival." The words were meant to be discreet, but in the quiet of that hour, even low voices felt sharp. Back at her seat, Doretta's tablet lit up again, clear to identify if personal safety compromised. "Your call." She stared at the message for a long moment, her breath shallow, quiet. Then she checked the time. 37 minutes to LAX. She reached inside her cardigan, her fingers brushing the edge of a laminated ID card sewn into the lining. She didn't pull it out, just let her hand rest there, steady. The overhead lights blinked to life with a sterile glow, the kind that signaled an end was near. One by one, heads lifted, backs straightened, and blankets were folded without warmth. Around her, the cabin came awake in soft clicks and rustles, but Doretta Vance remained still in seat 14C, spine upright, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her heart, however, was no longer still. The air had shifted. Descent announcements crackled overhead, just enough static to match the unease crawling up her arms. This wasn't just another red eye winding down. Something else was settling. Something heavier than jet lag or pressurized air. A younger attendant approached. Not Melinda, someone else. someone whose voice carried a tremble she tried to hide behind formality. "Ma'am," she said gently, leaning in so no one else could hear, "I've been informed that you may be asked to remain seated after landing. There's a note on your name." Doretta didn't flinch, but inside something twisted. A slow burn under her skin, the kind of heat that comes not from surprise, but from confirmation. She knew this was coming. The minute Melinda had leaned into that crew phone, the second she'd made Doretta a problem instead of a passenger. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her tablet, knuckles whitening. She gave a small nod, more acknowledgement than agreement, and the attendant quickly moved on. A few rows ahead, Warren Pike shifted. The hum of the cabin faded as his ears caught pieces of what had just been said. He turned in his seat, watching the younger attendant disappear up the aisle. Then he looked back toward Doretta, saw her stillness, and understood exactly what was happening. He stood. Not fast, not dramatic, but with the steadiness of someone who'd been sitting in silence too long. "Excuse me," he said to the nearest flight attendant. His voice was calm, but carried a gravity that cut through the soft murmurs around them. "I need to file a complaint. Right now." The attendant blinked. "Sir." "I saw what happened. The woman in 14C asked for water. She asked politely. She was ignored. And not 5 minutes later, I watched your lead attendant serve 2 other passengers in the same row." His voice got firmer. She wasn't loud. She wasn't disruptive. She didn't raise her voice. "But now there's a note on her name? You've got the wrong person flagged." Melinda appeared from the galley, expression tight. She moved quickly toward them. "Sir, our crew follows FAA protocol," she said, rehearsed and rigid. "If there was a misunderstanding, Warren turned to her. Don't bury this behind protocol. I flew aircraft for 3 decades. I know what this looks like. I've seen it too many times, and I've stayed quiet. Not tonight." People were listening now. Heads turned. Whispered conversation stilled. Doretta stood. She did so slowly, like a woman who knew the weight of attention but refused to be crushed by it. She smoothed the hem of her cardigan and reached into the inner lining. Her fingers curled around a slim, laminated ID card. Silver edge. Black print. Official. The silence in the cabin grew dense. "My name," she began, her voice calm and even, "is Doretta Vance. I'm a field supervisor with the American Society of Aviation Standards. I was assigned to this flight for an anonymous evaluation." Her eyes swept the row, then turned to Melinda. "I have recorded the entirety of my experience. The footage has already been transmitted to our oversight office." She raised her tablet, tapped once, and a soft video began to play. The audio was low, but clear. Melinda's voice, sharp, clipped, refusing Doretta a basic request. Moments later, the same voice, light and cheerful, offering snacks to a white passenger seated nearby. Gasps weren't loud, but they were real. The mother with the baby, a few rows back, leaned forward. Her eyes welled with something between guilt and relief. "I knew it," she whispered, voice barely audible. "I knew something felt wrong. I just didn't say anything." Doretta turned toward her. "You're not the one who needs to be sorry." Melinda said nothing. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her hands gripped the nearest seatback, knuckles pale. A curtain rustled near the front. Captain Eldon Rusk stepped into view, tall and composed, but clearly briefed. He moved slowly down the aisle, every step weighted. "Ms. Vance," he said, voice measured. "I understand there's a matter we need to discuss. I've arranged a private space at the gate so you won't have to speak in front of other passengers." Doretta met his eyes. "That's appropriate. Thank you, Captain." The intercom buzzed again. "Ladies and gentlemen," the co-pilot said, voice edged with unease, "we'll be landing at LAX shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." But no one cared about the landing anymore. They were watching something more powerful than turbulence. They were watching a woman stand in her truth, and watching a system take its first breath of accountability. The wheels hit the tarmac with a jolt that nudged Doretta forward in her seat. The cabin shuddered slightly, a tired groan from a long journey. Passengers around her stirred, some stretching, some blinking away sleep. But Doretta remained still. Her hands rested quietly on her lap, one finger lightly touching the edge of her tablet. As the aircraft taxied to its gate, she could already see them through the window. 2 uniformed officers waiting at the jet bridge. Arms crossed, radios clipped to their shoulders, feet planted wide. They weren't there for routine security. They were there for someone. And everyone on board had a pretty good idea. Who? Melinda stood near the front galley, her face stiff and pale under the bright fluorescence. She avoided Doretta's gaze, but not the captain's. Eldon Rusk approached her calmly, leaning in close enough that passengers couldn't hear, but Doretta could guess the tone. If what she said checks out, he told Melinda, you've just put the entire company in the middle of a storm. I followed protocol, Melinda muttered, her voice thin. Rusk didn't reply. His silence said enough. As the doors opened, an attendant directed Doretta toward a different exit, a side aisle that led to a private corridor. She didn't resist. She gathered her things slowly, deliberately, and followed the escort without looking back. In a quiet conference room adjacent to the gate, she was met by a representative from OSIS, middle-aged, well-dressed, and tired-looking. He offered her a firm nod. We received the full upload, he said. It's all clear. You did everything by the book. Doretta handed over her notebook, tablet, and a small external drive. It's not about punishing her, she said. It's about forcing this industry to see what it still refuses to see. The rep looked at her carefully. Do you want her removed? She shook her head. I want training programs to stop being checklists. I want someone like me to ask for water and not have it turn into a security threat. That's it. He gave a slow nod, scribbling something on his clipboard. We'll be issuing a public statement once legal clears it. But the internet didn't wait for legal. Within hours, the video of Melinda refusing service, then warmly chatting with another passenger moments later, surfaced on FlightWatch, a platform popular among frequent flyers and flight crews alike. The footage was brief, subtitled, and quietly devastating. The title read, "One glass of water, one system challenged." It spread fast. By morning, it had racked up hundreds of thousands of views. News outlets picked it up. Think pieces followed. Podcasts started debating it before the company had even issued an internal memo. The airline scrambled to respond. Vague statements, promises to review procedures. But the story had already become bigger than them. People started sharing their own stories. Quiet humiliations, small slights that added up over time. And Warren Pike, retired pilot, once silent observer, published a blog post that went unexpectedly viral. It began, I spent decades in the sky and never spoke up when I should have. Last night, I finally did. The comment section filled with gratitude, confessions, even apologies. At LAX, in the public arrivals hall, a small group of passengers from Flight SB 394 had gathered. Not planned, just instinct. The young mother who tried to quiet her crying baby stood with her son, now sleeping, against her shoulder. A man with a camera around his neck stood beside her. A college student with earbuds dangling from her hoodie. When Doretta stepped out of the secure area, they clapped, not loud, not dramatic. Just steady, heartfelt. The little girl from earlier ran forward and wrapped her arms around Doretta's waist. You were like a superhero, she whispered. Doretta looked down at her and smiled, finally letting the exhaustion show on her face. No, baby. I'm just someone who was tired of pretending I didn't notice. The girl nodded. Well, you still look brave. As Doretta walked away, phone in her hand, a quiet notification lit up the screen. A message from OSIS leadership. We're recommending a full audit of Skybridge Air's in-flight service policies. You started something. The meeting room on the 11th floor of Skybridge Air's headquarters wasn't built for warmth. Glass walls, chrome fixtures, a long polished table that reflected nothing but discomfort. The air was cool, the silence cooler. 5 senior executives sat in tense formation. Head of communications, HR, legal counsel, operations, and the director of in-flight services. They'd all watched the footage half a dozen times already. But protocol demanded one more review. On the wall-mounted screen, the silent video played again. Doretta Vance, calm and polite, asked for water. Melinda Grove, composed but cold, denied her. Moments later, Melinda was seen serving a white passenger with a cheerful smile, pouring hot tea like she was auditioning for a commercial. At the far end of the table, Melinda sat motionless. Her hands were folded so tightly in her lap, her knuckles had turned pale. She kept her eyes fixed on the screen, but avoided locking onto any part of it for too long. She knew every frame by now, what she said, how she said it, how quickly the rest of the country had heard it. The HR manager was the first to speak, flipping through a thin folder. She wasn't rude. No raised voice. No policy breach by the passenger. Not even close. Melinda cleared her throat but didn't raise her eyes. She was taking notes, watching me the whole time. That's not normal behavior. It felt targeted. The legal counsel leaned forward, pen tapping softly against the tabletop. She's a licensed federal auditor with the American Society of Aviation Standards. She was doing her job. And now we're at the center of a nationwide discussion we did not prepare for. The operations manager spoke bluntly. We can't afford this. Bias, even the appearance of bias, destroys consumer trust. We've already lost one major partnership contract over this. There was a pause. A long one. The kind that stretches because no one wants to be the first to say what needs to be said. She's been with us 14 years, the in-flight services director finally said. This isn't who she is. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she read the moment wrong. But another voice, cooler and firmer, broke in. Intent doesn't excuse impact. And this wasn't just a mistake. This was a visible failure, and it was recorded by the very person we were supposed to impress. The vote wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No hands slammed on the table. Just quiet agreement. Melinda Grove would be suspended, effective immediately. She would not interact with passengers again unless cleared by OSIS. She would be required to complete comprehensive retraining in anti-bias protocols, undergo psychological reevaluation, and reapply for certification to return to active service. No press conference. No dramatic apology. Just a quiet removal from the roster. And a loud message to the rest of the crew. Later that week, OSIS released its report not to the public, but to the people who mattered, federal regulators, major airline associations, and industry insiders. It didn't read like a scandal. It read like a warning. Skybridge Air has been downgraded to a 1-star service rating across all domestic routes for a period of 6 months. Independent review will determine eligibility for reinstatement after documented corrective actions. The rest was clinical. Timelines, benchmarks, monitoring procedures. But one line stood out. A request for water should not become a catalyst for fear. At her kitchen table in Inglewood, Doretta read that line 3 times, then set the paper aside. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She pulled a clean sheet of paper from her drawer and began to write. The letter wasn't addressed to the press or to the public. It was addressed to Skybridge's director of training. Her handwriting was clean and deliberate. I'm not angry. I'm exhausted. She wrote about what that moment meant, not just for her, but for every person who had been denied something small and made to feel ashamed for wanting it. She wrote about being dismissed, about being watched like a threat for simply being visible. She wrote about the cost of staying silent and the cost of speaking. I don't believe every act of bias is intentional, she continued. But when a system allows these patterns to repeat, it becomes something worse than intention. It becomes culture. At the bottom of the page, just before she signed her name, she added one last line. If kindness is a glass of water, don't let someone go thirsty just because they don't look like you. She folded the letter, sealed the envelope, and walked it to the mailbox. No return address. No expectation. Just a truth, placed into the world like a seed. 2 days later, as the sun was rising over Los Angeles, Doretta stood curbside outside Terminal 3. She had another flight to catch, another anonymous audit waiting in a different state. A rideshare pulled up. The driver rolled down the window. Morning. You flying out? Doretta nodded and slid into the back seat. Always, she said softly. The car pulled away from the terminal. A week had passed since the flight, but the ripples hadn't stopped. Inside the offices of Skybridge Air, tension still hung in the air like stale coffee and uneaten bagels. Meetings had been held behind closed doors. Policies were being rewritten line by line. Posters about dignity and equity were tacked hastily onto bulletin boards, and all flight staff had been enrolled mandatorily into a new training series labeled Implicit Fairness and Microaggression Awareness. Some employees rolled their eyes. Whispered complaints floated through break rooms. Overreacting. It's just one glass of water. This'll blow over. But others, they stayed quiet. Not out of fear. Out of reflection. Because for the first time, someone had turned on a light most had learned to ignore. Melinda Grove sat alone in a small conference room with a training supervisor and a laptop. Her uniform had been replaced with a simple navy sweater. The lines on her face looked deeper than they had a week ago. The screen played the footage again, Doretta asking, voice calm. Melinda turning away. Another passenger being served minutes later, with a smile. She couldn't look directly at it. Across the table, the HR director, a man in his late 40s with kind eyes but a tired voice, read aloud from a printed report. Several passengers described your tone as dismissive. A few said it felt targeted. One noted, and I quote, she wasn't angry, just invisible. Melinda looked down at her hands. You're not being fired, he continued. But if you don't learn from this career will leave you behind. The world's changing. You need to change with it. She nodded. Barely. But it was something. On the other side of the country, in a corner cafe in Santa Monica, Warren Pike sat by the window with a laptop and a half-empty cup of black coffee. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed the title he'd been thinking about all week. Silence is no longer neutral. He didn't write it for applause. He wrote it because he needed to. Because staying quiet for decades had finally caught up with him. In the piece, he admitted to every moment he looked away, every time he thought not my place, and how on that night he almost did it again. The post made its way through social media, shared by community groups, flight staff forums, and even one major airline's diversity page. He started getting messages from former passengers, retired crew, strangers he'd never meet. One woman wrote, "My son's been denied kindness his whole life. Thank you for finally saying something out loud." Warren replied with only 5 words, "I should have sooner. I'm sorry." And Doretta? She was already moving forward. A small regional carrier out of Texas had been flagged for inconsistent treatment on evening routes. She accepted the assignment without hesitation. She sat quietly near the back of the gate area, her new boarding pass tucked inside a slim journal. The hum of the terminal buzzed around her, overhead announcements, dragging suitcases, a child laughing into a phone. A young flight attendant passed by, stopped, then backtracked with a polite smile. "Ma'am, would you like a cup of water while we finish setup? We just put out a fresh tray." Doretta's eyebrows lifted slightly. The girl couldn't have been older than 25, maybe just out of training. Her voice was genuine. No script, no stiffness. Doretta smiled softly. "No, thank you. But I appreciate you asking." The girl nodded and walked away, not realizing she'd just reset the balance of something bigger than herself. Later that morning, a national morning show picked up the story. The host, sitting beneath bright studio lights, introduced the segment with a simple line. One glass of water revealed an entire system, and one woman changed it without ever raising her voice. Clips of the flight played, along with public responses and Doretta's now famous quote. Viewers called her calm, unshakable, brave. She didn't see the segment. She was already on another plane, pen in hand, eyes open. That night, in a hotel room just outside Dallas, she opened her journal and wrote one last line for the day. "I didn't do this out of anger. I did it because my daughter will grow up in this world. And I don't want her to stay quiet just because she's thirsty." She capped her pen, closed the leather cover. Outside the window, the night sky was still dark. But inside, something had shifted. She felt it, not loud, not flashy. Just steady, like a quiet flight, like a hand extended, like a single glass of water, offered without condition. So what does it say about us? that a simple glass of water could reveal something so deep. Maybe it's not about the water at all. Maybe it's about who we choose to see and who we overlook. Everyday kindness isn't loud. It doesn't need permission. But when it's missing, we feel it. What would you have done on that flight? If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something, don't forget to subscribe for more real, human stories that matter. We'll see you in the next one.